Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share some thoughts on the Baburnama, the first part, and also some passages that will emphasize what a diverse work of literature these memoirs are. I don't know that they're particularly well known in either Europe or North America among readers, and they should be. Babur's a fascinating writer, and he certainly led a fascinating and adventurous life. So Babur, very briefly, was living at the end of the 15th century, beginning of the 16th century of the Common Era, and he was living in Central Asia and ultimately Southern Asia. He would, towards the end of his life, by conquest, conquer what we think of as sort of northern India and create what would later be termed the Mughal Empire, although that term is probably not always accurate. That 100 years later would lead to the creation of works of architecture like the Taj Mahal. So Babur ultimately had some success, as a general, as a conqueror, as a leader, but throughout his life he wasn't always experiencing that success, and that's what gives a sort of brilliant confessional nature to his memoirs. Is that these are not the memoirs of Julius Caesar, where he's constantly self-aggrandizing and he's talking about how wonderful he is and what a brilliant leader he is and how courageous and bold he is. Babur frankly identifies moments where he is utterly unsuccessful towards the end of this first portion. During my stay in Tashkent, I endured much poverty and humiliation. No country or hope of one. Most of my retainers dispersed, those left unable to move about with me because of their destitution. If I went to my Khan Dada's gate, I went sometimes with one man, sometimes with two. It was well, he was no stranger, but one of my own blood. And so we have a very frank confessional nature to these memoirs, but they're much more than just details of his military exploits. There are aspects of travel writing where he describes the countryside, the landscape that he's either living in and residing in, that he's fleeing to, or that he is attempting to conquer. There are these wonderful personal aspects, and something that I think we don't see from quite a few memoirs. There's these wonderful personal aspects where Babur is detailing what's going on in his family. What are the discussions like? Who are these people that he's spending time with? They're not just quick, this person was really tall, this person had a red beard, this person didn't have a beard, this one was very beautiful, and this is the metaphor for her eyes. He has that, but he goes into more detail to talk a little bit about the personalities. He talks about his romantic exploits, or lack thereof at times. And so there's just so much of his life that he's willing to share in these memoirs that make it, I think, a really wonderful combination of memoir and nonfiction for readers to approach. Yes, there are a lot of names that will be totally unfamiliar. There are numerous individuals that he interacts with and encounters who have names that feel similar, but there are indexes for those names. We can read fantasy books filled with names of people that we've never heard of before, and we learn them. And I think a reader who's willing to engage the Baburnama on that level and take the time to try and keep track of who are these different individuals that Babur is interacting with, that he's working with, that he's being betrayed by, it really lends a deep sense of personality and reality to the narrative that make it a wonderful, wonderful work to engage. It is, however, also filled with really, really wonderful action set pieces, where Babur talks about some of the moments where his life is absolutely at stake. So here's an example of one. Let's see. I had posted a party of braves there and gone on when a large body of the enemy, mounted on foot, bore down upon them, drove them from their post and forced them into a narrow lane. Just then I came up, galloped my horse at them and scattered them in flight. While I was thus driving them out from the lane into the flat and had got my sword to work, they shot my horse under the leg. It stumbled and threw me there amongst them. I got up quickly and shot one arrow off. My squire, Kahil, had a weakly pony. He got off and led it to me. Mounting this, I started for another lane head. Sultan Muhammad Wais noticed the weakness of my mount, dismounted and led me his own. I mounted that horse. Just then Qasim Beg's son, Kambar Ali, came wounded from Jahangir Mirza and said that Mirza had been attacked some time before, driven off in panic, and had gone right away. We were thunderstruck. At the same moment arrived Saeed Qasim, the commander of Pop. His was a most unseasonable visit, since at such a crisis it was well to have such a strong fort in our hands. Said I to Ibrahim Beg, What's to be done now? He was slightly wounded, whether because of this or because of stupefaction. He could give no useful answer. My idea was to get across the bridge, destroy it, and make for Andishan. Baba Scheherazade did very well here. We will storm out of the gate and get away at once, he said. At his word, we set off for the gate. Khwaja Mir Miran also spoke boldly at that crisis. In one of the lanes, Said Qasim and Nasir's Dost chopped away at Baki Keys, I being in front with Ibrahim Beg and Mirza Kuli Kukuldash. As we came opposite the gate, we saw Sheikh Bayezid, wearing his pullover shirt above his vest, coming in with 3 or 4 horsemen. He must have been put into the charge of Jahangir's men in the morning, when, against my will, he was made prisoner, and they must have carried him off when they got away. They had thought it would be well to kill him. They set him free alive. He had been released just when I chanced upon him in the gate. I drew and shot off the arrow on my thumb. It grazed his neck. A good shot. He came confusedly in at the gate, turned to the right, and fled down a lane. We followed him instantly. Mirza Kuli Kukuldash got at one man with his rugged mace and went on. Another man took aim at Ibrahim Beg, but when the Beg shouted, "Hey, hey!" let him pass, and shot me in the armpit. From as near as a man on guard at a gate, 2 plates of my Kalmuk mail were cut. He took to flight, and I shot after him. And so he continues with this incredibly detailed memory of this flight out of a city that they've essentially lost control of. And that sense of loss of control is a key aspect of the Baburnama. And I think that sense of loss, despite the fact that he would ultimately find success later in life and really, create a large territory he would have control over in what we think of as modern Afghanistan and northern India, Babur was not successful in his early conquests. And he also lost control over Samarkand and could never really retake it. And ultimately, he lost control over his sort of small nation, Farghana, that he was leading, which is in modern Uzbekistan. And that sense of loss pervades a great deal of the text. He was writing this later on in life, and so there's a sense of melancholy that despite all of the splendor he will create, the success he will find, that he will have marriages that are more successful, and he'll have children who will succeed him and sort of perpetuate this empire he has, there is this real sense of loss. Going back several generations, Babur had been descended from Timur, or sometimes familiar to readers of Christian Marlowe as Tamburlaine the Great, who was essentially undefeated in battle and had really had incredible success. And so Babur felt some pressure as he had essentially lost this ancestor's legacy in not quite, I want to say 100 years before separate the two of them. And so Babur felt that loss. The term Mughal used for the empire that he would sort of found, and his grandson Akbar would really expand. That term is sort of an Arab and Persian corruption of the word Mongol, because Babur was also descended on his mom's side from Genghis Khan, going back a couple hundred years. And so he feels this sense that he has sort of let down his family's legacy through the loss of his homeland, his hometown, his citadel. And so that sense of there will be success, and I know there's success, at this later point in my life, but here's everything I've lost on the way there, is a really incredible way to approach sort of the military memoirs, the nonfiction memoirs, geopolitical memoirs, because those aspects of political machinations, who's betraying, and the anger that Babur unleashes when he loses or betrays, and the sort of oaths he swears and the curses, he's very specific about the type of hell afterlife he wants traitors to experience or enemies to experience. He's very specific about it. But there are also these moments where he goes into his personal life. Aisha Sultan Begim, whom my father and hers, my uncle, Sultan Ahmad Mirza, had betrothed to me, came this year to Kujand, and I took her in the month of Shaban. Though I was not ill-disposed towards her, yet, this being my first marriage, out of modesty and bashfulness, I used to see her once in 10, 15, or 20 days. Later on, when even my first inclination did not last, my bashfulness increased. Then my mother Kanim used to send me once a month or every 40 days, with driving and driving, dunnings and worryings. That first marriage isn't particularly successful. He immediately follows that up with, In those leisurely days, I discovered in myself a strange inclination, nay, as the verse says, I maddened and afflicted myself for a boy in the camp bazaar, his very name, Baburi, fitting in. Up till then, I had had no inclination for anyone in need of love and desire, either by hearsay or experience. I had not heard, I had not talked. At that time I composed Persian couplets, one or two at a time. This is one of them. May none be as I, humbled and wretched and lovesick. No, beloved as thou art to me, cruel and careless. From time to time, Babur used to come to my presence, but out of modesty and bashfulness, I could never look straight at him. But how then could I make conversation and recital? In my joy and agitation, I could not thank him for coming. How was it possible for me to reproach him with going away? What power had I to command the duty of service to myself? And so he's describing really his first love affair. He continues, he quotes other Persian verses. I'm abashed with shame when I see my friend. My companions look at me, I look the other way. And he quotes various Turkic verses as well. And there's this wonderful just sense of frankness to Babur's memoirs, that he is not here to put on a facade, that he's not here to self-aggrandize and praise himself. This is who he was. This is what he remembers of his life. And so this first part in Farghana ends with really abject defeat. He's left with basically two servants hanging out in a garden of a town that is not under his control, with word that his enemies are coming for him. And there is a breakdown in the memoirs at this point. Some pages have been lost, and we do know that he escapes and manages to sort of roam in close to, what for him would have been poverty, not just aristocratic poverty, but poverty, and hanging out in small hill villages or with tribes before he will make a descent south towards Kabul in what is modern Afghanistan. And that will pick up his memoirs. But these are fantastic. This translation from Annette Susannah Beveridge is an older translation. And there's a cool map in this edition. It is an older translation that I want to say about 100 years old, but it still reads wonderfully well. And I had mentioned, of course, that it read somewhat differently from Caesar. Julius Caesar's always just puffing himself up. And Babur identifies moments where he's brave or moments where he shows initiative. He laments the moments where they think that they're sneaking up for a conquest, and then somebody goes, wait a second, we might think we're going to surprise them, but actually they might be ready for us. We better get in battle array. So they take the time to do that, and then by the time they get there, everybody does know they're coming, and they've lost the surprise. Caesar's always talking about how successful he is, how much bolder he is than everybody. And he never talks about his personal life and as adventurous as that was. And so Babur, I think, gives us two very different views of a leader. I was reminded as well of the secret history from Procopius, in part due to the very frank, earthy nature of the secret history in the memoirs, that people are not necessarily successful or as chaste as they might be perceived from history. I was reminded as well of the deeply confessional nature of the Confessions by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau, of course, is very intentional and a little bit over the top with, oh, I did this and I did that. Babur is, I think, a little more self-possessed as he's writing. I've compared periodically the Baburnama to the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, because they're the moments of reflection, the moments where Babur recognizes he made a mistake or he took the wrong advice, and he sort of has this self-talk within these memoirs that are, again, very different, and I think just much more enjoyable to spend time with than the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And I was reminded as well of sort of the memoirs of Sherman, probably more than Grant, of the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War, where there's this very clear sense of life is not a pretty place during war, and that there isn't this, there might be heroic, action-packed moments, but that ultimately people lose their lives. Towns are taken and overrun or destroyed. And so there is this melancholy recognition of the human cost of war and battle that exists in Babur. So I'll be continuing to read this throughout this year. I look forward to thoughts from any of you if you've read this, or if you've read other nonfiction works sort of about Babur or the Mughal Empire. I look forward to learning more. So I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks.